In 1999, psychologists David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger ran a series of tests at Cornell University. They tested people on logic, grammar, and reasoning. Then they asked each person to estimate how well they'd performed compared to everyone else. The results were stunning. People who scored in the bottom 12% believed they had performed in the top 40. They weren't lying. They weren't being arrogant for show. They genuinely, completely believed they were above average, while producing some of the worst scores in the room. And here's what makes this truly unsettling. The less someone knew about a subject, the more confident they felt about it, because competence, real competence, requires enough knowledge to recognize how much you don't know. This is the Dunning-Kruger Effect, and it doesn't just apply to test scores. It applies to the way you think, the way you argue, the way you make decisions, the way you see yourself. Today, we're looking at 8 specific signs that you might be caught in this trap right now without knowing it. And I'll tell you up front, if you watch this and feel slightly uncomfortable, that discomfort is actually a good sign. It means you're self-aware enough to feel it. Stay until the very end, because sign number 8 contains a twist that most people in this niche completely miss, and it changes the meaning of everything that comes before it. Sign 1. You rarely feel the need to double-check yourself. Let's start with the most invisible sign. When was the last time you finished a task, made a decision, or formed an opinion, and then actively went back to question whether you were right? Most people don't, not because they're careful, but because confidence feels like competence. When we believe we understand something, the brain naturally stops asking questions. Why would it? From the inside, certainty feels the same, whether it's earned or not. Psychologist David Dunning himself described it this way: the skills needed to do something well are the exact same skills needed to recognize you're doing it badly. If you lack those skills, you lack the ability to see that you lack them. This is why poor drivers consistently rate themselves as above average, why people who know almost nothing about medicine confidently reject their doctor's advice, why someone who's read 3 articles believes they understand a topic that experts have spent decades studying. The sign isn't that you're wrong sometimes. Everyone is wrong sometimes. The sign is that you almost never feel the need to check. High-performing people, genuinely intelligent people, double-check compulsively, not because they doubt themselves neurotically, but because they know from experience how many times they've been wrong before. Sign 2. You find it easy to dismiss people who disagree with you. Think about the last time someone challenged your view on something you felt confident about. What was your first internal reaction? Was it genuine curiosity? Let me think about that. Or was it something closer to dismissal? They just don't understand, or they haven't thought about it as deeply as I have. This distinction is one of the sharpest indicators of the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. When someone operates near the peak of the Mount Stupid curve, the term researchers use for the spike of overconfidence early in learning, disagreement doesn't feel like new information. It feels like interference from someone who simply hasn't caught up yet. And this makes sense from the brain's perspective. If you genuinely believe you understand something thoroughly, what could someone who disagrees possibly offer? The overconfident brain doesn't ask, "What am I missing?" It asks, "Why don't they get it?" Here's the test. Can you accurately steelman an opposing argument? Can you explain the strongest version of the view you disagree with so well that someone who holds that view would nod and say, "Yes, that's exactly what I believe"? If you struggle to do that, you probably haven't actually thought as deeply about the topic as you think you have. Sign 3. You're uncomfortable sitting with "I don't know." There is an almost physical discomfort that comes with saying, "I don't know." And in people who have an overinflated sense of their own intelligence, that discomfort is significantly more intense, because "I don't know" feels like failure, like evidence that they aren't as capable as they believe themselves to be. So instead of sitting with uncertainty, they fill it, quickly, with the most available, most recently heard, most emotionally satisfying explanation. And once that explanation is in place, it solidifies. It becomes what they know. And what they know, they rarely revisit. This is called the illusion of explanatory depth, a psychological phenomenon where people believe they understand how things work in far more detail than they actually do. In a famous study, researchers asked people to rate how well they understood everyday objects, like zippers, toilets, or bicycles. Most rated their understanding as decent to high. Then they were asked to actually explain in detail how those things worked. The ratings collapsed, because the act of explaining forced them to confront what they didn't know. And that confrontation was genuinely surprising to most of them. Truly intelligent people are unusually comfortable with uncertainty, not because they're passive, but because they've learned that "I don't know yet" is not a stopping point. It's a starting point. Sign 4. You explain things by talking more, not thinking differently. This one is subtle, and if you recognize it in yourself, pay close attention. When someone doesn't understand something you're explaining, what do? The overconfident thinker typically does one of two things. They repeat the same explanation more slowly, or they repeat it more loudly. Same argument, more emphasis. What they rarely do is stop and ask, "Is there a completely different way I could frame this? Is there something about my model that isn't actually landing?" Not because they're slow, but because my explanation has gaps. The assumption underneath the first approach is telling. If they don't understand, the problem is with them. I've explained it correctly. The information is right. They just need to receive it better. The assumption underneath the second approach is different. If they don't understand, maybe my explanation is incomplete. Maybe I'm missing something. Let me reconsider how I'm framing this. Research on expert teachers versus novice teachers shows exactly this pattern. Experts, when faced with a student who doesn't understand, don't repeat themselves. They rethink. They find a new angle, a new analogy, a new entry point, because they understand the material deeply enough to know there are multiple ways into it. Novices, who know just enough to teach, but not enough to adapt, repeat themselves, louder, slower, with more frustration. If your first instinct when misunderstood is to blame the listener, that's worth sitting with. Sign 5. You have strong opinions about things you've engaged with briefly. How long have you been thinking about the things you feel most confident about? This is the question that reveals the most. The Dunning-Kruger curve has a specific shape that researchers mapped carefully. When someone first encounters a new subject, they know almost nothing. And they know nothing. Confidence is appropriately low. Then, as they begin to learn, after a few hours of reading, a handful of YouTube videos, maybe a podcast or two, something happens. Their knowledge increases just enough for them to start seeing patterns, and their confidence shoots upward dramatically. This is the peak of Mount Stupid, and then, if they keep going, something humbling begins. They start encountering exceptions, edge cases, contradictions, experts who disagree with each other. The elegant, simple story they'd built starts to fracture. Confidence drops. This is the valley of despair. And eventually, for those who persist, it rises again. Slowly, more accurately, calibrated by actual depth of knowledge. The problem is, most people stop at the peak. They read enough to feel like they understand. And then they stop reading, start opining, and mistake the confidence of the peak for the confidence of genuine expertise. Ask yourself, for the things you have the strongest opinions on, how long have you actually spent studying the other side? Not skimming, not reading articles that confirm what you already believe. Actually studying. If the honest answer is not very long, you might be at the peak and you might not know it. Sign 6. You confuse being articulate with being right. Some of the most persuasive people in any room are not the most knowledgeable. They are the most fluent. Articulacy, the ability to express ideas clearly, confidently, and compellingly, is a separate skill from accuracy. You can be completely wrong and say it beautifully. You can be exactly right and struggle to explain it. But the human brain doesn't always notice this distinction in real time. Confident, fluent delivery activates what researchers call the fluency heuristic. We instinctively equate how easily information flows to us with how true it is. This creates a dangerous loop for overconfident thinkers. They feel confident. That confidence makes them speak fluently. Fluent speech gets positive social feedback. People nod, agree, defer, and that social feedback becomes evidence to the brain that they were right, even when they weren't. Truly rigorous thinkers develop an internal filter for this. They've learned to notice when an argument sounds impressive, but doesn't hold up to actual scrutiny. They've developed the habit of asking, not, "Does this sound good?" but "Does this survive the strongest counter-argument?" If you've ever caught yourself thinking, "Well, I explained it clearly, so it must be right," that's a warning signal worth taking seriously. Sign 7. You remember your correct predictions far more vividly than your wrong ones. Here's a cognitive bias that sits underneath the Dunning-Kruger effect. Like a foundation, confirmation bias combined with selective memory. Our brains are remarkably good at building a flattering narrative about our own track record. When we're right about something, when a prediction comes true, when a decision works out, when a risk pays off, we remember it. We sometimes replay it. We occasionally tell other people about it. When we're wrong, it fades. We find reasons. The circumstances were unusual. The information available at the time was incomplete. It wasn't really a fair test. This is not dishonesty. It is a deeply ingrained feature of human cognition called hindsight bias, layered over self-serving attribution. The wins feel like skill. The losses feel like bad luck or external factors. And over time, a person's internal narrative of their own intelligence becomes systematically inflated. Not because they're lying to themselves, but because memory is not neutral. It curates, it edits, it selects for a story where you come out looking capable. The check for this is simple but uncomfortable. Sit down and honestly list your last 10 significant decisions or predictions. Not the ones you remember, all of them. What's the actual hit rate? Most people find it is significantly lower than they believed. Sign 8. The twist. If this video made you uncomfortable, you're probably not who it's about. Here is the thing about the Dunning-Kruger effect that almost nobody talks about. The people most likely to be caught in it are the least likely to be watching a video like this. The genuinely overconfident brain doesn't seek out content that challenges its self-assessment. It doesn't ask, "Am I as smart as I think I am?" It already knows the answer. It's moved on. The people watching this, sitting with the discomfort, checking themselves against each sign, feeling slightly uneasy, are demonstrating the one capacity that the Dunning-Kruger effect specifically destroys: metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. Dunning and Kruger discovered something equally important on the other side of the curve. People who performed in the top quartile of their tests consistently underestimated their ability. They scored brilliantly and then rated themselves as average. Because genuine competence comes with genuine awareness of how complex the subject is. of how much still remains unknown, of how many people around them are also deeply capable. The Bertrand Russell quote that feels almost too perfect here. The trouble with the world is that the stupid are cocksure and the intelligent are full of doubt. So if this video made you question yourself, that questioning is itself a sign, not of stupidity, of the beginning of real intelligence. The goal is never to feel certain. The goal is to feel accurate. If sign 8 hit you, comment below. Which sign exposed a truth about yourself you weren't ready to face? Meanwhile, subscribe to MindWire.